In the news this week, small business advocates urged the Prime Minister to take the risk and force interstate borders to reopen before Christmas. A WAMA News exclusive.
No vacation for you. WA snubbed as the federal government plans to reopen to international travel. And traffic ahead as more trucks take to the roads to transport a bumper wheat harvest. Plus, Dr. Andrew Miller's comment.
This is The Evening News with Ivan Loom and Sarah Smith.
Good evening. As Western Australia continues its hard border policy, prominent small business advocate Wes Hearns is urging the Prime Minister Scott Morrison to take leadership and risk offending premiers to reopen interstate travel by Christmas. In an exclusive interview, Mr Hearns also argued the McGowan government's decision to keep the borders closed will eventually hurt the economy due to loss of investment. He joined me earlier this week. Wes Hearns, thanks for your time. You're calling for the Prime Minister to risk offending premiers using whatever means necessary to open up the state border for Christmas. That includes pooling federal funding, media campaigns and court action. Why is it necessary? I mean, isn't it over the top?
Well, I mean, the Prime Minister shouldn't be worried about offending anybody, in my opinion. That's his role. His role is to unite a country and lead it to where he thinks it should be. And I think in many respects, our Prime Minister has done a wonderful job. I think his response at the start of the pandemic was perfect. He was in the media every day. He brought a lot of calm and stability to the narrative. But, then he played to the Federation and in my opinion, gave way too much control to the states. And I've just not seen him pull it back together. And, I think the people have become pawns in a political game. And the division is really hamstrung Australia.
Here in Western Australia, the borders remain closed, but our economy is thriving as a normal society without COVID. Now, if WA is a country, it will be second compared to China when it comes to economic growth. Our mining industry is functioning well, so why should the borders open up to the eastern states? Well,
West Australia has more to offer the world than just mining. And so, sure, the state is prospering, but I wonder if you were to go down to speak to the tourism operators in the Margaret River, what they might say. I don't know that it's unanimous across the board that everybody in West Australia is doing well. The economy's definitely going well, and that's because mining's going well. And the trickle down effect of mining going well is always that West Australia does okay. But remember, this is not just an economic decision. There are families that can't see parents, can't see children, can't travel for work, can't provide for their families because of these borders. And, the sinister part of me thinks that your Premier is just playing the game till election time.
So overall, where do you see this heading for Western Australian small businesses and the public?
I think West Australia will suffer if you stay closed. You will not get the investment that the state needs. It will fall behind in investment for sure, because, whether that be investment from the east or investment from international, people are not going to want to invest in a state that they have no clarity over. So if West Australia stays closed, then they will, over a 10-year window, they'll suffer because there'll be less investment. What does it mean for the people? The people are safer because there's less COVID there. So that's a real issue. But, the rest of Australia will open up and they will deal with a larger outbreak of cases of COVID across the country. But they've produced, they've upped their capacity in hospitals, their contact tracing and all those sort of things. So it's completely manageable, like it is with, the other 8,000 ailments that humans can have.
Looks like the Prime Minister won't want to trigger any West Australian voters, especially Mark McGowan, Labor's popularity. Whatever Mr McGowan's doing at the moment is keeping COVID out. So you're saying the Prime Minister should put pressure on the government and not afraid of offending premiers? I mean, isn't that shooting himself in the head when it comes to the election? Because, he will lose popularity.
I think he's already shot himself in the head. And if he doesn't show some strength now in these last few months, I think it's all over. So, yeah, so I think that he really needs to, his leadership has been left wanting, and my opinion doesn't matter. I guess if I just listen to the broader spectrum, people think that he goes on holiday every time there's an emergency. When there's bushfires, he's not here. There's a lot of people that are saying, Mr. Morrison, what? We don't hear from you. You're in Canberra, you're walking the halls. So I think he really needs to come out all guns a blazing because he's lost a lot of his base. I think if we, my political opinion is that I think the LNP handling of the pandemic has basically handed the next election to Labor. And my own personal opinion is that's a horrible outcome for small business. So I would really like to see him run the risk of ruffling some feathers and actually standing up and leading by conviction and not just defaulting to the Federation and allowing the states to make the calls.
The federal government has unveiled its plan to reopen the country to international travel by next month.
However, Western Australians will not participate until vaccinations reach 80 to 90%. Melissa Thorne reports.
For those of you wishing to travel overseas for Christmas, forget it. The WA Premier has shut down the federal government's plan to restart interstate and international travel. The Premier has rejected the cutting of COVID travel restrictions and introducing home quarantine schemes for fully vaccinated Australians. Contrary to the federal government's earlier announcement, the McGowan government aims to keep the hard border and hotel quarantine scheme intact. WA's border, according to the Premier, will not be opening until an unknown date in 2022.
Western Australia will open up internationally at some point in time. And it's probably just a difference of months between us and other states, in particular Victoria and New South Wales. And if that means in the interim we don't have mass deaths, we don't have huge dislocation in our economy, we don't have lots of people losing their jobs, well then I think the choice is clear. We wait till it's safe.
Though more and more West Australians are getting their second vaccination, it seems that this will be the second Christmas we spent apart from our loved ones, both interstate and abroad. Melissa Thorne, WAMN News.
Perth roads could be facing heavier congestion after a bumper wheat harvest, with higher numbers of trucks carrying grain clogging roads to ports. Without a train line for the grain in WA, there are concerns that transport via roads will create problems for drivers. That's despite support for the truck transport by the agricultural industry. Nelson Liu with this exclusive report.
A booming agricultural season turning into a city road nightmare. A bumper grain harvest set to put pressure on Perth roads.
We're really going to struggle this year.
Farmers are expecting 20 million tonnes of grain, signalling a record harvest. But a current lack of train transport for grain means more truck movements through Perth.
The majority of the grain comes to the Kwinana zone, so a huge amount of those truck movements will end up going down to the city.
60% of grain is transported by train and 40% by truck. But with 700 kilometres of railway lines designed for grain transport closed, truck trips carrying grain to port are expected to skyrocket every day.
As the average driver, it means they're going to have to cope with, for Perth anyway, over 150,000, 170,000 truck movements per day. 60% which I talked about, that really needs to be lifted to 75% to get these trucks off the road.
There are concerns transport will be a struggle, with mice a problem if grain isn't moved, and fears of trucking fatalities. The rail, tram and bus union says heavy truck movements will clog up Perth roads year-round, but agricultural representatives say that's not the case. The Pastoralists and Graziers Association believes Perth roads would not be facing severe congestion from trucks transporting grain.
Look, the truck trips are not all going to the city. Kwinana, the highway through there doesn't mean that the wheat trucks will be going through the CBD.
They say it's simply about cost effectiveness.
Every farmer in Western Australia has the right, in fact the obligation, to get their grain to port by the cheapest means possible. It would be absolutely wrong for governments to mandate that producers would have to put their grain on the train just to support that system.
Meanwhile, there are beliefs more investment is needed in rail to improve efficiency. A revival of the closed Tier 3 grain rail is underway, with a business case currently being developed. Nelson Liu, WAMN News.
A WA nurse who went to the eastern states to help in the fight against COVID-19 is still suffering long-term side effects after contracting the disease. The 45-year-old nurse, Renee Freeman, is urging other nurses and Western Australians to get vaccinated now. Despite taking precautions and being a very fit and active woman with no underlying health conditions, Ms. Freeman still caught COVID-19. The nurse says the quality of life is not even at 50% of what it was before she caught the virus.
If you're able to get vaccinated, please do, because I would not want to see anyone else suffer what I've been through. And if I can stop just one person going through this, then that's all I ask.
New high-capacity signalling is set to improve ageing train communications and control systems on the Metronet network. The system will send real-time data to the Public Transport Authority to monitor the speed and location of every train for a more efficient use of the existing rail network. Expressions of interest have been announced for the system, and the McGowan government says it was due for an upgrade.
This type of signalling is used throughout Asia, it's used throughout Europe and of course certain parts of the eastern states. What it really is making sure that we utilise our train lines more better, and also making sure that we can have a better service for everybody.
Federal Liberal MP Steve Irons is withdrawing from recontesting his electorate in the next federal election. Mr Irons had previously nominated to recontest his seat of Swan, but announced last weekend he will retire to spend more time with his family after the sudden death of a family friend. Mr Irons says the situation has forced him to reconsider his election plans.
Tokyo is exiting their state of emergency for the first time in more than 6 months, despite 200 new cases. Restrictions will gradually relax in Osaka and other major cities. This means alcoholic beverages can be sold until 8 p.m. and restaurants can open until 9 p.m. this weekend. The Japanese government has urged citizens to continue to follow health guidelines and get vaccinated to avoid another wave of the pandemic. Russian President Vladimir Putin has called Chinese President Xi Jinping to congratulate the Asian nation's 72nd anniversary. Mr. Putin says China has achieved admirable progress in economic, social and technological development, at the same time contributing solutions on international issues. He says both countries will work hard to ensure further cooperation on regional peace and stability.
This weekend marked the end of the annual IGA Perth Royal Show at the Claremont Showgrounds. The event is successful as always, giving city people a taste of country life. During the week, thousands flocked to the Claremont Showgrounds as farmers encourage city slickers to meet and greet WA livestock. More than 100 years old, the Royal Show is providing an opportunity to bridge the divide between the regional and metropolitan Western Australia. The first official show was held in 1834, with the agriculture show becoming royal in 1890. In 1902, the Royal Show moved to Claremont, where it's been held ever since.
Everyone gets to touch and feel and handle, and there's just a lot of happy smiles and happy people, and it makes it all worthwhile for me because I work very hard every day with these animals, and to make them tame and friendly as this and everything, and it's lovely that I see people enjoy them, and it makes it all worthwhile.
People still love patting the rabbit.
It's hard to pick a favourite because there's so much to see and do, but I do love the sheepdog trials at the Royal Show. What about you?
I agree though, but if I have to choose, I'll choose the baby goats and the baby camels.
Oh, so cute.
Yeah, I got to see it in person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Simply amazing. And now here's AMAWA spokesperson Dr. Andrew Miller with his weekly COVID-19 update and commentary regarding the New South Wales and Victoria situation.
Hi, thanks for your time. In terms of where to next with COVID, we're seeing that New South Wales is continuing to open up in spite of very high cases and going for a vaccine crash or crash through kind of approach, and that's what was done in Alberta and Canada back in June, and they're now 74% vaccinated fully, everyone over 12 years of age, and they have 260 people in the ICU, a lot of hospitalisation and a huge drain on their healthcare system. So we think the West Australian approach is a better one, keeping community spread to zero. This is also what's happening, of course, in Queensland, in South Australia, in Tasmania and in the Northern Territory at the moment, and in New Zealand and in Taiwan, and these places are managing to get by with very little community spread and much better economy, much better healthcare outcomes. But what we do need to do is not only get our vaccination levels up very high, New South Wales 90% plus in many postcodes now, and we can do that here in Western Australia. We also have to get to those people between 12 and 16. Big appetite there, huge rollout happening in those age groups at the moment because parents obviously and kids really want to get vaccinated. We've got to find a vaccine for the 0 to 11-year-old group, and that doesn't seem to be far away, so certainly worth not risking long-term COVID for those kids. And 2% hospitalisation. That's 2 in every 100 kids ending up in hospital with COVID around the world. So we want to avoid that, even if they do survive that, and even if they don't get the long-term symptoms. We just don't know what's going to happen in the future. So fingers crossed we'll get that vaccine approval soon for them. But we also got to deal with ventilation, air changes in rooms, and having good masks available, because there will always be people like those who we love, who are on chemo or have organ transplant, or very young babies who can't be vaccinated. And we want to protect them from this horrible disease as well. So work to be done. Obviously vaccination is number one on the list, but there's still other things to do. And as the talk of international travel, interstate travel increases and that pressure comes on, or if we get outbreaks, the more preparation we've done early, both in vaccination, ventilation of masks, all the other things we need to do, the better off we're going to be. Thanks for your time.
And that's Dr. Andrew Miller. Here's Leo with what's coming up on 6 News tonight.
Thanks, guys. On 6 News breaking news, Victoria's COVID infections expected to peak sometime soon, but cases are continuing to grow, passing New South Wales multiple days in a row as the Premier points the finger at rule breakers for the sharp rise. Plus, a public ICAC inquiry set to be held after Gladys Berejiklian sensationally resigned as New South Wales Premier. The hunt now on for a new leader of the Liberals and for the state that could be announced within 48 hours. And Australia set to reopen its international border within weeks as vaccination rates continue to improve in all states and territories. We'll tell you what the plans are and how the rules will be different depending on where you live. You can see full details on those stories and plenty more by heading to our YouTube channel. Just search 6 News Australia to find us, or our website 6newsau.com. For now though, guys, it's back to you.
Thanks, Leo. And that's our weekly news and current affairs. For the latest news at any time, head to our website, wamnnews.com.au.
From Sarah and myself, we wish you good health, good night. See you next Sunday.
Thanks for stopping by.